That was probably the most disappointed I have been in a NASCAR race in a very long time. And to be clear, we hyped it up a lot, so we might be to blame for this, but there's so much to discuss. Let's talk about it. Hey everyone, it's Taylor Kitchen and welcome back to Above the Yellow Line, where we talk about NASCAR all the time. And on this show right now, we're talking about the Food City 500 from Bristol Motor Speedway. And much like last weekend at Darlington, Hendrick Motorsports just dominated the entire race practically, except last weekend, the Hendrick Motorsports driver that dominated the race wasn't able to win it. Sorry, William Byron. However, this time around, different story. Kyle Larson got the lead on lap 40, was able to hang on to it for most of the race, leading 411 laps and winning the race at Bristol. I mean, that 5 car was just lights out. Of course, this dominant performance comes off the heels of Kyle Larson's win in the Xfinity Series on Saturday. Unfortunately, fell just short of the win at Bristol in the Truck Series on Friday. So hasn't been able to complete the sweep of the weekend just yet, but I feel like it's coming very soon for Kyle Larson. But all of that said, these wins this weekend for Kyle Larson and that team were emotional. The NASCAR community is mourning the loss of 3 significant figures in this sport, and for Hendrick Motorsports, their communications director, Kyle Larson's PR rep, John Edwards, unfortunately passed away this past week. His presence is going to be missed in the garage, and as Kyle Larson said, Jeff Gordon said, everyone at Hendrick Motorsports said this win was for John. So our heart goes out to everyone at Hendrick Motorsports, John Edwards' family. I cannot imagine the incredible loss and grief that they are going through. The NASCAR community is also mourning the loss of Al Pierce and Shiggy Hattori. It's been a brutal week for the NASCAR community, so we are keeping our thoughts with those families, those teams, and those friends of those that we lost this past week. I am very glad that Hendrick Motorsports got that win to honor John this weekend. And like I said, a dominant win for Kyle Larson, leading 411 laps. Crazy. And also Kyle Larson, after that win, said he was glad he was able to keep Denny Hamlin from completing a three-peat. Denny Hamlin finishing this race in that second position, unfortunately was not able to win 3 races in a row, but nevertheless had a strong run towards the end of the event. Bristol, of course, is the race that Denny Hamlin won last spring, was hoping to go on a back-to-back there. Unfortunately, did not happen for that number 11 team, but nonetheless, a good effort from them, though. Speaking of Joe Gibbs Racing, Ty Gibbs, his first top 5 of the season, and the first top 5 for him in quite some time in the Cup Series. Great result for that 54 car, and had a great run the entire race. Now, as we're going to talk about a little later in the show, when we go to our race rating presented by Happy Hour Racing, wasn't a whole lot to do in this race, passing-wise, tire-wise, etc. And we're going to get to that, trust me, but nonetheless, I don't want that to discount Ty Gibbs' great result, because he definitely needed that, but Ty Gibbs finishing in that 3rd position. Let's just keep going with the Joe Gibbs Racing drivers. We have Chase Briscoe finishing in the 4th position. If we skip farther ahead, we have Christopher Bell finishing in the 8th position. So ultimately, all Joe Gibbs Racing drivers finish inside the top 10, which is pretty good considering I feel like they've all been kind of unbalanced as a team. So to see everyone be very consistent during this event was positive, all things considered. But if we go from Briscoe in 4th and go on to the 5th position, that is Ryan Blaney. Towards the end of the race, he was trying to go on a long run strategy, hoping for a caution, because typically towards the end of these Bristol races, we do typically see cautions. Unfortunately, that did not come for that 12 team. They went down to pit road, came back on track in 9th, and ultimately were able to work their way back to 5th. They knew that they weren't going to win the race. They knew they ultimately did not have a race-winning car. So finishing top 5 for that team, considering that they had a strategy that didn't seem like it was going to work out in the end, worked out in the end. So a good result for Ryan Blaney in that 12 team. In 6th, we have William Byron, and in 7th, another Chevy driver. Talking about Ross Chastain, and we have to give credit where credit is due. I quite honestly didn't realize how decent Ross has been doing this season until I went back and looked at his stats, because I was like, Ross Chastain, awesome, he got a top 10. Guys, this is his 3rd top 10 in a row. I didn't realize this. I don't know if you realize this, but Ross has actually had a pretty decent season so far. Of the 9 races we've had so far this year, he's finished inside the top 10 in 6 of those. So he's having a quietly good year. He's not really making a whole lot of noise, maybe frustrating some drivers on track, But the results aren't incredibly flashy, but all things considered for the rest of the Trackhouse team, which we're going to talk about in a few minutes, that's really good. You don't need to be flashy, just get the results. I think Ross Chastain could ultimately be a deep-seated playoff contender at the end of the day. I think he could be somebody that we don't see maybe going far into the playoffs yet, but I see him making it, and I see him potentially, I'm just going to throw this out there, maybe making it to the round of 8. I think Trackhouse could shock us, really kick up the performance. I do think Ross will win at some point in the regular season. I don't know. I just see him making a deeper playoff run than I think we expect of him this year, but a lot of that goes down to he's being consistent. He's starting to put in those consistent results, and I don't think we're realizing it, and oftentimes when there's not a whole lot of energy or thought put towards one driver who's having a quietly consistent start to the year, a quietly consistent season period, they turn that around and shock us in the playoffs. And I say shock us, more so continuing to do the great work that they're doing. So fantastic job for Ross Chastain in that one car, but we're going to move on, of course, to 8th place of Christopher Bell. 9th? Yeah, we're on to 9th. 9th? AJ Allmendinger, and kind of on the same note, he's had a decently good season as well. Not as good as Ross Chastain ultimately, but when you look at the Kaulig equipment, something that myself and Dom Joseph talked about in the post-race show after Darlington, Kaulig has struggled with this Gen 7 car. That is no secret, and obviously there's no true comparison to what the 16 car did last year because it was run on a part-time basis with multiple different drivers. But for AJ Allmendinger, this is his 3rd top 10 of the season. And it was a convincing top 10 nonetheless. He was inside the top 10 most of the race. Unfortunately, the same success didn't translate over to Ty Dillon this event, but Ty Dillon ultimately ran really well last weekend at Darlington, and again, we highlighted that in the last video recapping Darlington from the track. Ultimately, happy with what I'm seeing from Kaulig. They need a performance boost, and ultimately, I really do think that having somebody like Ty Norris over on their team now, I think that's really helpful, trying to give them a competitive edge. So, happy to see Kaulig doing well, and we will move on to talk about Austin Dillon in 10th. This is his first top 10 of the season, you guys. First top 10 of the season for Austin Dillon coming at Bristol nonetheless, so happy to see that result. Ultimately, a good result for a lot of Chevy teams that maybe we didn't think were doing so well this season, maybe hadn't done so well this season, but ultimately got the result they needed at Bristol, a race that we thought was going to be more unexpected than it ultimately was. Nonetheless, fantastic results for those teams. One driver who missed out on a fantastic result due to a poor pit stop, Carson Hocevar. This is a race of what could have been for that 77 team, let me tell you. Oh my gosh. During a pit stop at the end of the race, the car fell off the jack, and ultimately it put Carson 2 laps down. He was able to work his way back onto the lead lap, of course, but I'm gutted for Carson Hocevar and that team because they had a top 5 car. He and his teammate Justin Haley, who finished in that 13th position, had top 10 cars. They had fantastic speed all day long and were running consistently inside the top 10. They qualified really well too, qualified inside the top 10. Both of them did. I've been so impressed by the speed that those 2 Spire cars have shown this year. And sometimes it's just you have a bad pit stop. It's what happens. These pit crews are put under tremendous pressure. Sometimes things happen. Sometimes they just don't perform well during one stop, and that's fine. It'll happen. We're humans. We make mistakes. It just sucks to see that what could have been a really solid, maybe top 5 day for Carson Hocevar slipped right at the end of the race. There wasn't enough time to recover. So it just sucks. But ultimately, this team will just keep their heads held high and move on. Because I do think that Carson Hocevar is going to win a race this season. Which one it is, I don't know. I think he will, though. It's just a matter of where. But they're working towards a win with these results. I also did want to highlight Jesse Love made his Cup Series debut this weekend. Not really a flashy debut by any means. He finished in the 31st position. And I have the press release here from RCR, and I want to read some of his comments after the race. He said, quote, "I felt really comfortable today at Bristol Motor Speedway, to be honest. I felt good physically after 500 laps, and now I'll have to go back and digest everything that happened this weekend. It was a lot to process in the moment, but for how good I felt we were during the race, I now have to understand how the race unfolded and what to do better next time." So ultimately, this was a race really just of learning for Jesse Love. It was a race of him trying to figure out the cars around him, how the competition really works in the Cup Series, how his car works in the Cup Series. He's going to have a few more races he's doing this year with RCR and that number 33 Chevrolet. But it was a race of learning. Did I expect him to go out there and finish in the top 15, top 20? No. If a driver does that in their debut, I am darn impressed. This was truly just getting a sense. And what a race to debut at. Again, like I said, a race where there was a lot of unknowns going into the weekend, not knowing what the tire would do, not knowing how the cars would behave because of last spring versus what we had in the fall. There was a lot of unknowns going into this weekend, and there was only so much you could do to prepare. So ultimately, just to be able to finish the race, I think is a win for Jesse Love, and appreciate his perspective, saying that he felt good physically, he felt the car was in a good place. It's just a matter of learning. Before we get into our race rating, I did mention that we talk about the other half of TrackHouse Racing for just a few seconds. So let's talk about the polar opposite race that we saw for Ross Chastain, who had a decent race, versus Daniel Suarez and SVG. SVG, of course, spun on track. Bristol was just not kind to him whatsoever. There was a speeding penalty for SVG, and then Daniel Suarez, his crew was involved in a pretty scary situation on pit road where the tire of the number 42 was not secure onto that car, came down pit road, and almost slammed into the fueler of the number 99 car. Very scary situation. Those situations should give you a better appreciation for what these pit crew members do. If you don't have a good appreciation for what they do, I hope you do. But it's scary. It's a dangerous situation, and because of that, ultimately, like when we have those tires go rogue on pit road, there are harsh in-race penalties for that, as they should. It is a huge safety concern. So I'm glad to see the pit crew members on the 99 team were okay. We're not harmed by the tire at all. Unfortunately, in the same stop, though, they had a tire go loose and into the pit stall next to them while that team was making an active pit stop. So that was a penalty for Daniel Suarez. But man, I don't know what's missing. Obviously, Shane Van Gisbergen in his first full-time season in the Cup Series, road course king ultimately for SVG, but still trying to figure it out at the oval tracks in this Gen 7 car, which is a whole different beast for him, right? So he's still learning. I'm going to put that aside. But for Daniel Suarez, it's been tough. I mean, looking at his results right now, he of course had a second place finish at Vegas. Every other finish he's had this season, though, has been outside the top 13. That is not where I would expect a Trackhouse car to run. And though Suarez hasn't run incredibly well the past 2 seasons, I expect more. I know this is only race 9 of the season, and like you all know, I give these teams and these drivers 10 races to start the year before I really start putting some judgment behind the performance and kind of analyzing it a little bit more. But for Suarez, I don't know what else needs to be done to get him to where I think he can perform. So ultimately, disappointed in the performance of the 99 car this year. Hope it can get better. Nevertheless, though, let's get into our race rating because there is so much to say, and of course, our race rating above or below the yellow line is presented by Happy Hour Racing. We're going to be doing a giveaway between Happy Hour Racing and Bezic Designs, 2 of our fantastic partners here at ATYL Media, so stay tuned on our socials linked in the description. But that said, if you're looking for officially licensed motorsports merchandise from Formula One, IndyCar, and NASCAR, go to happyhourracing.com/ATYL and use the promo code ATYL2025 to get a special discount at checkout. That said, though, I blame myself. I blame myself for my expectations for this race because I overhyped it. I thought we were going to get something similar to what we got last spring after what we saw at practice. This is what the tire looked like after practice on Saturday. This is what the tire wear looked like during a long green flag run on Sunday. The tale of 2 different tires. And ultimately, this is what we got. And the reason being, Sunday, the track temperatures were higher. We had direct sunlight hitting the concrete. Add that with the addition of PJ1 that NASCAR laid down in the turns at Bristol, and of course, we're going to get a different race than what we expected. So the thought process and the hope that we were going to get Bristol Spring 2024 2.0 ultimately didn't happen. And on top of that, it couldn't have happened anyways. There is something to be said about the unknown of what we faced last year in the spring. It was an anomaly. Nobody expected it. Nobody knew how to deal with the tires or handle it. Ultimately, these teams towards the end of the race figured it out, but they were scrambling. We knew that happened last year. These teams had that data and that understanding. So going into this race this spring, they knew how to better handle it. So we weren't going to get the same chaos that we got last year regardless. And what's crazy about this, though, is last spring and in practice, we were seeing that these tires were lasting or were going to last around like 35 to 41 laps, like a maximum, absolute max, right? This weekend obviously was not the case. These tires lasted much longer, and I actually saw a tweet from Jeff Gluck that he heard a spotter, a crew chief, somebody over the radio saying these tires could have lasted us 70 plus laps. That's crazy to me. Ultimately, it was very, very different than what we expected to see. And what's crazy to me too is the track temperature being just slightly different made that big of a difference with the tire. That was wild to me too. And because the tire wear was so different, we did have a tale of two different races. Kyle Larson in his post-race press conference said last year was pretty excessive. They were maybe running like 50%, right? 50% of what they could actually do. This year though, because the tires were a little better, they were running more so at 100% throughout a run. Maybe like, what did he say? 85 to 90% in his opinion. And so ultimately the conditions today allowed them to run more full out. However, if conditions today allowed them to run more full out, and this is what we saw of them running full out, I didn't like what I saw. So if we're banking on Mother Nature just making the temperatures perfectly cold during a race weekend for these short track races, which we know, of course, getting into the summer months isn't possible, then something's wrong. If we are banking on temperature being the change between what makes a good race at the short tracks and a bad race, then we need to step up our game and figure out what to change, because ultimately the tires, like we said, are the band-aid to the actual problem, which is, in my opinion, and what I've heard the drivers talk about, is the car. Put some damn horsepower into the thing. Like, seriously, just at this point, do it, try it, I don't care. And Kyle Larson said it pretty well in his post-race press conference after he won the Xfinity Series race, talking about how fun these Xfinity cars are to drive because they've got power in them. The truck cars don't have power in them. These cup cars don't have enough power in them. Put some power in the cup cars and see what happens. See if it fixes things. And I know I'm preaching to the choir at this point and it's going to fall on deaf ears, and the drivers have been preaching to the choir and that's kind of fallen on deaf ears. But I think it would be fantastic if we've tried the last solution that we haven't tried yet to see if it helps these short tracks. Because I would hate to see Bristol Motor Speedway, one of my favorite tracks on the schedule, one of the most iconic tracks, move down to maybe one date because it doesn't sell out, because the product sucks. I would hate to see it, the last greatest Coliseum, have one date. I don't want that, but we're moving that direction because we're not fixing the product at these short tracks, which is cutting off the dates of these races. And I want to be very, very clear. This is not me saying that a dominant performance equals a bad race. Never said that. Not the case here. Even if the performance wasn't dominant and this was the same product that we got, I still wouldn't be happy. I'm giving this race a 40%. This is, I think, the first below the yellow line rating that we've had this year, and a convincing one at that. I love the dominant performance from Kyle Larson. I think it was spectacular, very old school, awesome. That's cool. The product itself, though, not great, needs fixed pronto. And also crazy to think about this too. Hendrick Motorsports and Joe Gibbs Racing have won all but one race this season, and that was with Josh Berry at Vegas. They are putting on a clinic, and they are the two top dog teams, so I totally get it, totally fine. But are we going to have another team win next weekend? Or I guess not next weekend, but after that, with Talladega coming up, I think we could have a surprise winner. So definitely a lot to look forward to. Obviously, after this weekend, the Cup Series has an off week. However, the Truck Series and the Xfinity Series are going to return to Rockingham. I will be there covering that race in person, so follow along with me at _TaylorKitchen_ and at Racing America on social media accounts to follow along with that race weekend. But that does it for me on this episode of Above the Yellow Line. Like I said, make sure to follow us on social media, all linked in the description below, or go to AboveTheYellowLine.com to learn more about us and, of course, our partners. If you're not following along with the Xfinity and truck race at Rockingham next weekend, have a fantastic off week, safe travels if you're going to be traveling, or just enjoy some time to relax. But I highly recommend watching the Return to the Rock. I am so excited. But thank you all so much for tuning in, and until next time, I'll see ya. Bye.